In a northern kingdom, where winters were long and white, there lived a prince named Arden. That evening he was returning alone from a hunt as the sunset faded behind the tops of the pines, tinting the snow pale gold. His hunting bag was empty, and no game hung from his saddle. But Arden was not saddened. He had never loved the clashing of weapons, the thrill of the chase, or the sharp call of the hunting horn. He went into the forest for something else, for the silence that lay between the trees more softly than snow, for the measured crunch beneath his boots, and for the delicate patterns of frost on the branches. Among warriors and hunters, he seemed a strange prince, too quiet, too attentive to the world. He returned empty-handed, but with a full heart, for his greatest prize that day was the resounding silence of the sleeping forest. At the edge of a snow-covered clearing, Arden suddenly drew in the reins, and his horse obediently stopped. On the dazzling white snow lay a single raven feather, smooth, long, blue-black, with a cold sheen along its slender shaft. Beside it was a small crimson drop. Someone had crushed a rowan berry, and its juice was slowly spreading, melting the snow and leaving a bright, almost bloody trace. Arden gazed at this chance image for a long time. The black feather, the white snow, and the crimson drop did not clash with one another, but seemed to have been created together. Such rare harmony lay hidden in their simplicity that the prince found it difficult to look away. It was as though he heard the silent call of an unknown mystery. It was a chance poem written by nature upon winter's blank page. And in those 3 strokes, crimson, white, and black, he suddenly read the beginning of his own destiny. Arden looked at the 3 colors amid the winter silence for a long while. At first he thought he was merely admiring a rare beauty. But soon a clear and powerful feeling arose in his heart, like the memory of something he had not yet known. White spoke to him of tenderness and the purity of the first snow. Black spoke of quiet, profound strength, of the mystery of a nocturnal wing, not gloomy, but dependable. Crimson spoke of living warmth, laughter, courage, and the joy of life. And Arden understood that somewhere there was a woman in whom these 3 qualities were joined, just as naturally and beautifully. He was seeking not simply love, but this harmony, light that did not blind, darkness that did not frighten, and warmth that did not burn. Only beside such a soul would he find the peace that neither the palace nor glory had given him, and for the first time call some place home. From that day on, Arden's life gained direction. His former melancholy did not vanish entirely, but it grew quieter, giving way to a calm and steadfast resolve. The prince began his search. He did not scan the faces of young women for black hair, white skin, or a crimson rose held in their hands. What drew him was not an outward resemblance to the winter scene, but something rarer. A person beside whom the heart stopped wandering and recognized its home. Arden studied the faces of the ladies at court more closely, listened to their words, and noticed their deeds. Then he began traveling through the towns and villages of his kingdom, speaking with the daughters of noble families and humble craftsmen. But nowhere did he find that wholeness in which tenderness was not weakness, strength was not coldness, and warmth was not empty cheerfulness. His journey began not with the sound of hoofbeats, but with a new way of looking at the world. After a long and fruitless search, Arden nearly lost hope. One evening, the road led him to a small house standing far from the great highways. The door was opened by an elderly woman with clear eyes and hands that smelled of earth, mint, and dried herbs. She had once served as the royal gardener, but now lived there alone. She fed the prince hot soup, set a cup of herbal brew before him, and quietly asked why he was so sorrowful. Sensing rare wisdom in her, Arden told her of the black feather, the crimson drop, and the white snow, and then of the woman he hoped to find. The old woman neither smiled nor showed surprise. She merely nodded gravely, as though she had heard a familiar tale. "You are not looking for a woman, Prince, but for a miracle. And miracles do not grow in ordinary gardens." And Arden understood that his road must lead beyond the bounds of the familiar world. The old gardener drew the lamp closer and lowered her voice, as if afraid to disturb an ancient secret. "Beyond 7 misty mountain passes lies the Garden of Wonders," she said. "At its very heart grows the only apple tree of its kind in the world. Only once in many years do 3 golden fruits ripen upon it. Within each one lies the possibility of the meeting you dream of." Arden froze, but the old woman raised a hand, not allowing hope to turn into haste. "Remember, these apples must not be taken for glory, whim, or impatience. They will reveal their secret only to one who has learned not to seize a meeting, but to cherish it. To one who is ready to give first, and only then receive." She told him that the path to his dream ran through the garden, but the key to it lay not in strength or speed, but in the nearly forgotten art of patience. The journey to the Garden of Wonders took Arden many weeks. At first he hurried, counting every rest as time lost. But the road patiently taught him otherwise. One day after the rain, he saw a weary carter whose wagon had sunk deep into the mud. Arden dismounted and spent an entire hour placing branches beneath the wheels with him until the wagon reached firm ground. On another evening, he gave the last room at a roadside inn to a family of freezing travellers with small children, while he calmly spent the night in the stable on fragrant hay. Later, The prince stayed for several days in a poor village, helping a peasant nurse a sick horse back to health. Once, such a delay would have distressed him, but now he did not consider it an obstacle. He thought less and less about deadlines, and more about the people he met. Arden understood that impatience could not hasten a meeting. He was traveling for enchanted apples, but along the way he gathered a more precious harvest, patience and compassion ripening within his own heart. At first, every stop seemed to Arden an irritating hindrance. It felt as though the stuck wagon, the sick horse, or a request for shelter were taking him farther from the Garden of Wonders and the meeting for which he had left his home. But gradually, his irritation faded. He saw gratitude in people's eyes and noticed how his soul grew quieter after every kind deed. Then Arden remembered the old gardener's words and finally understood their meaning. The road was not hindering his search. The road itself was the search. It was teaching him patience, compassion, and the rare ability not to hurry life. Now he could stop, hear another person's pain, and remain beside them without thinking of lost time. Arden was seeking the Garden of Wonders beyond 7 passes, while all along he was cultivating a garden within his own soul. And when the final pass appeared ahead, he no longer hurried. He was ready for the meeting. At last, after crossing 7 misty passes, Arden saw the Garden of Wonders. He had expected marble terraces, tall fountains, and rare flowers, but before him lay a quiet valley, hidden in the very heart of the mountains. Everything there was simple and perfect. Clear springs murmured between ancient apple trees. Leaves rustled almost inaudibly above the path, and bees droned lazily in the warm air. The air seemed so transparent that it could be scooped up in one's hands. A faint sweetness of flower pollen lingered on the lips. Arden walked slowly, afraid to disturb the peace of that place. The silence was so deep that it seemed possible to hear the grass growing and the fruit filling with juice. The garden resembled the very beginning of the world, when everything still knew its place, and nothing had learnt to hurry. At the tallest apple tree, Arden was met by the keeper of the garden, a woman with clear eyes, who looked remarkably like the old gardener. Without saying a word, she pointed to 3 golden apples and allowed him to take them. On the return journey, among the dry stones of the pass, the prince began to suffer from thirst. Yet more than water, he longed to see the promised miracle. Impatience prevailed. Arden cut open the first apple. From its golden heart emerged a beautiful young woman in snow-white garments. "Water?" she asked softly. Then Arden remembered in horror that he had not filled his flask before setting out. Only a few drops remained at the bottom. He offered them to the young woman, but they were not enough. She smiled gently, as though forgiving him, turned into a delicate edelweiss, and withered at once, scattering into pale dust. Thus impatience killed the miracle itself. Arden understood that longing for a meeting and being ready for it were two different things. The first lesson was bitter. Love requires foresight. Continuing his journey, Arden boarded a ship to cross the cold sea. This time his flask was full, and the prince believed that his former mistake would not be repeated. But soon the sky darkened. A piercing rain poured down. The wind tore the sails, and the waves began tossing the vessel from side to side. Seeing so much water all around him, Arden decided that the right moment had come, and cut open the second golden apple. From it emerged a young woman dressed in garments as black as a raven's wing. She was trembling from the cold. "I need warmth and shelter," she whispered. Arden was at a loss. The deck pitched, the sailors battled the storm, and the icy wind tore at his cloak. He tried to shelter the young woman, but it was not enough. She looked at him with quiet compassion, turned into a black feather, and flew away into the rainy night. Then Arden understood that it was not enough to prepare for a past misfortune. One must also know how to create peace in the midst of a storm. His second lesson was patience. After the second loss, Arden could not look at the sea for a long while without pain. When the storm subsided, he continued homeward, and the last golden apple lay in his bag. Now the prince did not touch it without need. He understood that the fruit was not a reward or a toy, but a life entrusted to his care. To open it in the middle of the road, amid cold, wind, and chance, would mean once again placing his own desire above another's fate. And so Arden decided to wait. One could not prepare for the most important meeting while rushing onward. It required silence, dependable shelter, and peace within the heart. He did not return to the palace as a victor. There were no trumpets and no splendid spoils. A weary, humbled traveller entered through the gates, carrying one apple and two bitter lessons. Now he knew that before welcoming a miracle, one must create a safe home for it. The next morning, Arden awoke before sunrise. He did not hurry, but lay listening as the palace filled with the quiet sounds of a new day. Then he took the last golden apple and went to a secluded part of the garden, where an old spring, overgrown with moss, flowed from beneath the roots of an ancient willow. Arden filled a clean earthenware jug with fresh, cold water. Nearby, he gathered dry branches and kindled a small, hot fire. He spread a warm travelling cloak upon the grass so that it could shelter the one who would come. When the preparations were complete, the prince sat beside the water and became still. The spring murmured softly, the fire crackled, and birds awakened among the branches. Arden listened to them until his heart became as quiet as the morning. He was preparing a place not for a guest, but for destiny, and every detail was a silent vow. This time, he would be ready. Only when everything was prepared and the silence around him had come to resemble the silence within his soul, did Arden take out the last golden apple. He held it in his palm for a few moments, then carefully, almost reverently, cut it open with a silver knife. The golden peel opened, and from its radiant heart emerged a young woman. Her name was Lianna. Her hair was black as a raven's wing against a winter sky. Her skin seemed white as the first untouched snow, and a living crimson blush glowed upon her cheeks, bright as a drop of rowan juice. But Arden did not look at those colours. He was struck by her eyes. Clear, calm, deep, and remarkably attentive. There was neither fear nor demand in them. Lianna looked at him as though she saw not a prince, not a traveller, and not a seeker of wonders, but his whole heart. She stepped from the golden fruit, and the winter premonition became a living, breathing soul. Lianna did not rush towards Arden or speak the words of gratitude expected from a rescued heroine. She calmly accepted a cup of water from his hands, took several slow sips, and sat beside the fire, stretching her palms toward the warmth. The prince did not hurry her. He merely placed the travelling cloak around her shoulders and remained beside her, listening to the murmur of the spring. At last, Lianna raised her clear, attentive gaze to him. "Thank you for the water and warmth, Prince. You prepared for our meeting. But tell me, have you learned what matters most? Can you listen when an answer does not come at once? Can you wait without demanding anything in return?" Arden understood that she was not a reward for the road he had travelled, but a living soul who chose for herself whom to trust. And so he answered not with words. He simply sat across from her and prepared to wait as long as she needed. Arden did not tell Lianna of the 7 passes, the stormy sea, or the 2 lost miracles. He did not promise her eternal devotion or try to seem wiser than he was. After a long pause, he raised his eyes to her and answered simply, "I do not know, my lady, but I am learning." Lianna studied him closely. In those words, there was neither a beautiful pose nor a wish to please her. Before her stood not a self-assured young man, accustomed to getting what he wanted, but someone who remembered the price of his mistakes and was not ashamed of being unfinished. Then her face softened, and for the first time, she gave him a truly warm and trusting smile. His simple, "I am learning," sounded more beautiful to her than 1,000 vows, because it held the truth, quiet, steadfast, and dependable. And so, beside the old spring, their love began. Their love grew slowly, like a young tree that first puts down roots and only then reaches toward the light. Arden did not hurry Lianna, demand quick declarations from her, or try to make her part of palace life at once. He gave her time to become accustomed to new voices, rooms, and customs. Lianna, in turn, taught him to look more attentively at the familiar world. She noticed how the bark of apple trees darkened after rain, how ants went around a fallen petal, and how the evening wind changed the scent of the grass. Even Arden, who had always loved silence and nature, had once passed by such small wonders. They rarely appeared at lavish balls. They far preferred to spend their days in the royal garden, talking or simply sitting silently beside one another. Their feeling was not a wildfire, but a quiet flame in the hearth that did not burn, but warmed and gave light. Lianna taught Arden not from books, but through the garden's quiet signs. Before the rain, she asked him to stop and breathe in. The earth smelled dry and tart, as though it were waiting. After the first drops, the scent became dark, damp, and deep, as if the soil were awakening beneath the cool water. In winter, Lianna showed him the bare branches and explained that the garden was not dead. It was resting. The earth could not be forced to bear fruit endlessly. Every living thing needed silence to gather strength again. In spring, when the servants wished to cut flowering branches for the palace halls, she stopped them. Most of the blossoms had to be left for the bees and the future apples. Arden listened to the buzzing among the white petals and understood for the first time that beauty did not exist only for human eyes. Thus he learned not merely to admire nature, but to hear its measure. Lianna revealed to him the wisdom of leaves and roots, not to take everything beautiful for oneself, but to protect the life to which it belonged. As a sign of their union, Arden and Lianna decided to plant a garden unlike any that had existed before, either in the human kingdom or in the enchanted valley. In the quietest corner near the palace, where dew lingered long in the mornings, they dug 3 holes together and lowered young apple trees into the earth. The first was to bloom with dazzling white petals, pure as the first snow. The second belonged to a rare variety with dark red leaves that looked almost black at twilight. The third bore small crimson fruit in autumn, bright as rowan berries. Arden held the slender trunks upright, while Lianna carefully spread the roots and covered them with soil. Then they watered the trees with water from the old spring. In this way, they returned to the earth the 3 colors that had once brought them together upon the snow, and their love put down true, living roots in that soil. Before long, Arden and Lianna celebrated a quiet wedding. There were no long speeches, magnificent processions, or noisy feasts. Only those closest to them, candlelight, and apple branches above the table. Afterward, the garden with its 3 young trees became their favorite refuge. There they left behind palace cares, strict etiquette, and obligations. Beneath the white apple tree, Lianna read old legends to Arden. Beside the tree with dark leaves, they spoke of fears and hopes. And near the crimson fruit, they could remain silent for a long time, understanding one another without words. With each passing year, the branches grew stronger, the shade grew deeper, and their closeness deepened as well. They created their own little world there, where neither had to seem stronger or wiser than they truly were. Their kingdom was not the throne room, but this garden, and their crown was the silence they shared. Their quiet happiness was interrupted by troubling news. One morning, a dust-covered messenger entered the garden and handed Arden a letter from the distant provinces. Mountain shepherds and farmers of the valley were quarreling over water and ancient boundaries. Streams were being blocked with stones, fields were left dry, and neighbors who had lived peacefully only yesterday were already reaching for weapons. A little longer, and war would have begun among the subjects of a single kingdom. Arden silently read the letter twice. As a husband, he wanted to remain beneath the 3 apple trees beside Lianna. But as a king, he understood that his duty was to prevent bloodshed. "I must leave today," he said softly. Lianna did not try to hold him back. She merely adjusted the clasp of his cloak and placed a crimson apple in his palm. They said farewell without grand promises, with sadness and complete understanding. Thus the king's duty took Arden away from their garden, so that he might save the entire kingdom from strife. Arden did not set out at the head of an army. He took with him only a few wise advisors, a scribe, and an elderly surveyor who knew the riverbeds and the ancient borders. The sword at his side was more a sign of royal dignity than a threat. He was not going to decide who was right and who was wrong. Arden wanted to hear the shepherds who had lost their summer watering places, and the farmers whose fields were withering without water. He hoped to find a solution in which neither side would feel defeated. Before leaving, he held Lianna's hands for a long time. "I will return as soon as I can," he promised. They both understood that the journey would be long. Reconciliation required not the strength of a sword, but patience, attention, and wisdom. Arden was going to remind the people that they drank from the same river and lived beneath the same sun. After Arden's departure, Lianna remained at the palace beside the Queen Mother. She was a proud, commanding woman who for many years had been accustomed to considering herself the sole mistress of the royal household. Every order there had once been spoken in her voice, and every important decision had passed through her hands. She had never believed the story of the young woman who emerged from a golden apple. The queen saw Lianna not as a miracle, but as a cunning stranger, perhaps a sorceress who had secretly subdued her son's heart. Lianna's quiet influence irritated her most of all. Arden did not argue with Lianna, but he listened to her more attentively than to his mother's counsels at court. Now the palace was empty without the king, and in that silence, the old jealousy awakened completely. The Queen Mother decided that fate itself had given her the chance to rid herself of her daughter-in-law, reclaim her son, and once again become the only absolute power in the palace. The Queen Mother decided not to spill Lianna's blood. Death might provoke questions, pity, and Arden's anger. It would be far safer to erase her from the palace, replace her with another woman, and make everyone grow accustomed to the substitution. For this, she chose Mireia, one of the young women she had raised. The girl was not wicked. She was timid and lonely, and all her life she had dreamed of earning praise just once. "You will put on her dresses and take her place," the queen whispered. "You will become her shadow. When the prince returns, be quiet and obedient, and agree with his every word. Men love submissive women. Soon he will forget his sorceress and fall in love with you." Mireia turned pale, but the queen went on promising her honor, respect, and Arden's own gratitude, as well as protection from any judgment at court. She presented the frightened girl not with a crime, but with a role in a performance whose reward was to be another woman's love and another woman's place in the sun. The Queen Mother waited a long time for the right moment. One afternoon, with uncharacteristic kindness, she invited Lianna to walk with her in the park and said that she wished to show her a rare flower. They passed the familiar avenues, descended to an overgrown pond, and stopped at an old summer pavilion, long abandoned by the gardeners. Inside, it smelled of dampness, dust, and withered leaves. The moment Lianna crossed the threshold, the queen locked the door. From the folds of her dress, she drew a tarnished silver amulet, covered in ancient symbols. Its dull stone flared with a cold light. The queen spoke forgotten words, and the air around Lianna began to tremble. It was not a spell of death. It caused the body no pain. It erased name, memory, love, and the very thread connecting a person to herself. Lianna tried to call out for Arden, but she could no longer remember his name. In the silent pavilion, words turned a living soul into a blank page. Lianna did not fall or disappear. First her face grew pale. Then her hands and shoulders became transparent, like morning mist above the water. The outlines of her body wavered and dissolved in the cold radiance, and the spell gently but inexorably drew her toward the overgrown pond. The Queen Mother stepped back as Lianna's luminous form slipped through the stone steps and entered the dark water. For a moment, 3 colors lit the depths. There appeared a fish, unlike any ever seen before. Its scales shimmered dazzling white, crimson, and deep black, as though Arden's winter scene had come alive beneath the water. It moved silently and gracefully, preserving her former beauty, but deprived of name, memory, and human voice. Thus Lianna did not perish, but was hidden from the world. Her story ended on the tongues of human beings, so that it might continue in the wordless movements of the water. The Queen Mother returned to the palace alone and announced that Lianna, exhausted by her longing for Arden, had gone to stay with relatives at a distant monastery. The courtiers were surprised, but no one dared contradict her. That same evening she brought Mireia to Lianna's chambers. The frightened girl put on one of her dresses, sat at her window, and placed her hands upon the table exactly as the queen had instructed. From then on, she slept in another woman's room, walked through another woman's garden, and touched things that still held the warmth of their true mistress. Mireia hardly spoke to the servants, moved nothing, and expressed no wishes of her own. She feared that any word might reveal the deception. And so a living counterfeit settled in the palace, a silent shadow, an obedient doll whose silence and submission were woven from fear. After Lianna disappeared, the palace did not become empty, yet it seemed to lose its breath. Each morning, the servants still opened the heavy shutters. The cooks prepared meals. The clocks struck the appointed hours. And the advisors assembled in the hall. Everything continued according to its established order, and everything was wrong. No one heard Lianna's soft singing among the apple trees anymore. The flowers planted by her hands began to wither, though the gardeners dutifully watered the soil. The corridors grew colder, and the sunlight passing through the tall windows seemed pale and alien. Mireia moved soundlessly through the rooms in another woman's dresses, leaving neither warmth nor life behind her. The palace resembled a clock that continued to run, but had long ceased to show the correct time because its mainspring was broken. Several months passed. Arden was returning home with peace. He had managed to reconcile the mountain shepherds and the farmers of the valley without bloodshed. But his thoughts were no longer of victory. He urged his horse onward, longing to see Lianna. Mireia met him on the palace steps, wearing a familiar dress. From a distance, she looked almost as she once had, and Arden hurried toward her. But the instant he embraced her, his heart grew wary. The familiar warmth was absent. There were only coldness and a strange, empty silence. He spoke of the journey, of the garden, and of how much he had missed her. Mireia answered briefly, without raising her eyes, and agreed with his every word. Arden watched her more and more closely. Her features were familiar, her voice almost the same, but her soul was silent. He had returned to the same home, and embraced what seemed to be the same woman. Yet everything within him whispered, "This is not Lianna." Disappointed and dejected, Arden left the palace more and more often for the distant part of the park, where an old pond lay overgrown with reeds and dark water lilies. It was easier to breathe there and to listen to a silence unlike Mireya's cold muteness. One day, an unusual light flashed in the depths. From beneath a broad leaf emerged a fish unlike any he had seen. Its scales shimmered in 3 colors: dazzling white, deep black, and vivid crimson. Arden stood motionless, unable to understand why he could not look away. The fish glided smoothly and cautiously, barely touching the water with its delicate fins. There was something painfully familiar in its movements. This was how Lianna used to trail her fingertips across the surface of the spring, listening to the rings upon the water. His mind saw only a fish, but his heart recognized the dance of her soul. It beat faster, filling with anxiety and timid hope. From that day on, Arden came to the pond daily and spent hours silently watching the voiceless stranger, feeling that she held the answer. The Queen Mother noticed that Arden was disappearing more and more often into the distant part of the park and sitting for hours beside the old pond. Fear quickly revealed the reason to her. Lianna's magic had not died, but had merely hidden itself in the water. That very night, she ordered the servants to catch the 3-colored fish and destroy it. But in the morning, the nets came back empty. The fish had vanished without a trace. Yet on the bank, in the very place where Arden usually sat, a slender, graceful tree had grown in a single night. Its branches were covered with snow-white blossoms, pure as the first snow. Among them were almost black leaves that shone like a raven's wing. And lower down hung clusters of bright crimson berries, resembling rowan fruit. Arden stood before the tree for a long time, feeling his former premonition turn into certainty. The Queen had ordered the memory living in the water to be destroyed, but it had merely changed form, taken root in the earth, and blossomed in the 3 cherished colors before her very eyes. Now Arden scarcely left the 3-colored tree. He sat beneath its slender branches, touched its dark leaves, and felt with growing clarity that this was no chance miracle, but a trace of Lianna. Seized by panic, the Queen Mother ordered the gardeners to uproot the tree at once and burn it to the last branch. They obeyed. By evening, only black earth remained on the bank. But in the morning, the Queen looked out the window and cried out. In place of the felled tree stood a small, radiant palace. Its foundation was made of smooth black stone. Its walls shimmered with milky white pearl, and its roof blazed with the facets of crimson rubies. Arden approached it and felt his last doubts vanish. They had tried to drown Lianna's soul and cut it down, but it had built itself a home from the 3 cherished colors. This was her magic, her memory, her call. He placed his palm upon the pearl door and understood that now he must enter. Arden entered the palace alone and without fear. From a high window, the Queen Mother watched him, pale with terror, but did not dare come near. Inside, there was neither gold nor a throne, nor servants. Before him opened a palace of their quiet memories. In the first room stood the garden arbor, where Lianna had once taught him to distinguish the scents of herbs and listen to the earth before the rain. Beyond the next door murmured the old spring, where they had first met and where her smile had become the beginning of their love. Further on, Arden saw a familiar table. Upon it lay Lianna's unfinished book about plants, and beside it, his cup with its rowan pattern. Everything was so alive that it seemed she had only just stepped out into the garden. He was walking not through rooms, but through the days of their happiness, and every object preserved the memory of her. At the end of the corridor, Arden saw the final hall. It was filled with soft, diffused light, as though morning were entering through a delicate veil. Lianna stood at a tall window and looked out upon the garden where 3 apple trees grew, one white, one dark, and one crimson. She was human once more. Black hair fell over her shoulders. Her face remained calm, and there was dignity in her motionless figure. Hearing footsteps, Lianna slowly turned. Arden stopped. There were no tears, no anger, and no reproach upon her face. There was only a quiet, wise sorrow, as though she knew the price of all that had happened, but had not yet decided whether what was lost could be restored. She did not rush toward him. She did not hold out her hands or speak his name. Lianna simply waited. She waited for him in the very heart of her memory, and her silence was the final trial. Arden understood that before embracing her, he must hear the question she had not yet asked. Arden took a step towards Lianna, but she stopped him with a slight movement of her hand. There was no cruelty in her gaze, only the calm seriousness of someone no longer willing to be another person's dream. "You followed me through every one of my transformations," she said softly. "You recognized me in the fish, the tree, and the stone. But now that I stand before you once more, tell me the truth." She paused. "Will you be able to recognize and love me, not for the 3 colors, not for beauty, and not for magic? Will you be able to love my voice and my silence, my choices and my freedom to be myself, even if one day I no longer resemble the picture you saw upon the snow?" Arden understood that she was asking whether he was ready to love, not the image born from his hope, but a living woman, changing, free, real, with all her transformations. Arden listened to Lianna until the end and smiled, not as a dreamer who had found a beautiful image, but as a man who at last understood the meaning of the entire journey. He stepped closer and gently took her hands. Lianna, when I saw the 3 colors upon the snow, I thought I was seeking their embodiment. But in truth, I was seeking the feeling of home. I recognized you in the fish, the tree, and the stone, not because they had 3 colors, but because beside them, my heart stopped wandering. He held her hands a little more firmly. But I will always recognize you, not by your form, not by your beauty, and not by magic. My home is your voice, even when you are silent, and your freedom to remain yourself. Lianna smiled softly. In that moment, they both understood. The trials were over, and love had finally become stronger than the dream. Arden took Lianna by the hand, and together they left the enchanted palace. The moment the pearl door closed behind them, the walls trembled, dissolved into the morning mist, and disappeared, as though they had been only a dream that had fulfilled its purpose. Hand in hand, they crossed the garden toward the main palace. Servants stopped motionless at the sight of them, but Arden did not pause or explain anything. In the throne room, the Queen Mother and a pale Maria were waiting. Arden spoke neither accusation nor threat. He calmly led Lianna to the chair beside the throne and helped her take her rightful place. Silence reigned in the hall, but now it was not empty. It was clear and final. Arden did not pass judgment in words. He simply restored to its place what had been forcibly displaced. And the light that entered with Lianna became the verdict itself. Seeing Lianna beside Arden, Maria turned pale, fell to her knees, and burst into tears. She confessed everything: the borrowed dresses, the silence, and her obedience to the Queen Mother. "I did it not out of hatred," she whispered. "I was afraid of her, and I was even more afraid of becoming no one again, unseen and unwanted." Arden looked at her sternly, but Lianna stepped closer. "Your fear caused great sorrow," she said softly. "It does not excuse the deception, but revenge will heal neither you nor us. Go in peace and try to find your own path instead of taking another person's place." Maria raised her tear-stained face, unable to believe what she had heard. Lianna, who had herself been a prisoner, granted freedom to the woman who had helped confine her. That very day, Maria left the palace, without honors, but also without chains. The Queen Mother sat motionless for a long time, looking at Lianna and Arden. She understood that her plan had been destroyed forever. Her daughter-in-law had returned, and her son no longer sought his mother's approval or feared her displeasure. Without saying a word or asking forgiveness, the Queen slowly rose and left the throne room. No one stopped her, and no one followed. She settled in distant chambers that she had seldom visited before. She was not banished, stripped of her name, or put on trial. But her power over the decisions of others vanished, and with it, the purpose with which she had filled her life for so many years. Gradually, the queen faded, learning to be merely an elderly woman in a great castle, rather than its secret mistress. The palace did not cast her beyond its walls, but it cast her out of its heart. After Lianna's return, peace was established in the kingdom, founded not on fear, but on truth and trust. The 3 apple trees in the quiet garden blossomed richly once more, one with snow-white flowers, another with dark leaves, and the third with crimson fruit. Now the garden gates stood open to anyone who entered without haste and with an open heart. Arden and Lianna ruled long and wisely. They listened to their people as attentively as they had once listened to each other beside the old spring, and so strife seldom arose in their land. In time, their story became a legend. It said that true love is not the pursuit of an ideal image, but the quiet, daily recognition of the living person beside you, their light, their shadow, and their warmth. They understood that they had found each other not beside the enchanted apple, but at the moment they learned to hear even silence.